Good evening. Thank you for joining us here. We're so pleased to be partnering with the Willmar Public Library on this Moving Words Writers Across Minnesota event, featuring the talents of Allison McGhee, Sunyoung Shin, and Mike Wohnoutka. I'm Wendy Worden, Programs and Services Assistant at the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, which is the Library of Congress designated Minnesota Center for the Book. As we get started this evening, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, indigenous keepers of the land from which I'm broadcasting tonight. This land was reserved by the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. I also want to acknowledge the Ojibwe people as fellow indigenous inhabitants of this land. Dakota and Ojibwe people are also the original stewards of stories in this place now called Minnesota, and we at the Friends honor that tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state today. The Friends has coordinated the year-long Minnesota Book Awards program for 14 years, and as Minnesota's Center for the Book, we produce programming that benefits all ages and reaches all corners of the state. We are grateful for the generosity of each writer who chooses to share their personal stories, and we respect what they choose to share. We also appreciate our audience's desire to learn from writers and their experiences. On to our main event this evening. This series is made possible in part by the state of Minnesota through a grant to the Minnesota Department of Education, and additional support is provided by the Harlan Boss Foundation for the Arts and Education Minnesota. To start things off, we'll have a brief reading and presentation from each author. First, I will welcome novelist Allison McGhee. Allison writes fiction both for young people and adults. She teaches writing at various universities around the Twin Cities metro, as well as independently. So welcome, Allison.
Thank you, Wendy. And thanks to the Friends, and thanks to my fellow panelists for making me feel more comforted. I'm going to begin by reading a little bit from my, I'm not sure what, it is a novel, but it's a novel in verse-ish prose, I guess. It's called What I Leave Behind. It stars 16-year-old Will, who is walking his way through the grief of losing his dad to suicide a year ago. And it is written in 100 very short chapters. So I'm going to read the beginning of it. Each chapter is, you can see, numbered with Chinese characters, 1 through 100, because there is a blessing store in the book with 100 blessings that you can buy for $1 each. You ever had real cornbread? Like from a cast iron skillet stuck in the oven to preheat while you mix the batter? A hot, hot oven. So hot that before you open the door, you have to put oven mitts on your hands. And when you take the cast iron skillet out, you pour in a little melted butter and it hisses. The skillet's that hot. And then you pour in the batter and it starts to brown and puff around the edges even before you put the skillet back in. That kind of cornbread. That's the kind I mean. You got your various cornbreads, my dad used to say. You got your non-sweet northern, non-sweet southern, your Swedish northern, and then you got your dad's cornbread. The way he said it, it was like he was speaking in boldface, you know, dad's cornbread. He used to put it together from a recipe in his head. Maybe I'll try to make it tonight. I do that sometimes, try to recreate the recipe, try to make it come out the way his did. I keep the cast iron skillet in my closet, eggs in the fridge, butter, no milk, but that's okay. Water might work. Son, sometimes you got to walk the day out of you, you know, walk it right out through the soles of your feet. Dollar Only is closed now. My shift is over. It's Tuesday night, which means my mom's got the overnight shift and she's not going to notice if I'm not home. The night and its sidewalks are right out that door. Wring out the mop, empty the bucket, sign out, say goodbye, to my boss, Major Tom, waiting to lock up and exit out the back door to his car. Major Tom, he's not a walker. Most people aren't, but I am. So tonight the air itself is dark. That happens sometimes. It's not just the lack of sun, it's the presence of darkness. If you're a walker, a real walker, your feet can figure out the right route. Sometimes the right route is one that goes past the places you love, like the cathedral, like the park off Whittier, like the Grand Central Market and its stalls. Sometimes the right route is the route not past other places, places you maybe love, but can't walk by right now, like Playa's house, like the Blessing store, like the river bridge over 4th Street. Whoop. Let your feet find the way. You'll know it when they do. Then let the day drain out of you. Let whatever comes into your head just float around in there. What's in there tonight? Cornbread, black cast iron cornbread like my dad used to make. And that raggy little blanket Playa used to carry to school in her backpack back in elementary school. And the case in the back of the blessing store, 100 blessings, all numbered in Chinese. To unbreak your broken heart, to make a cloud of safety around you, to light at night for peace. Theo, how I got the job at Dollar Only was I saw the ad posted in the corner of the window. So why here, said Major Tom, why Dollar Only? Well, I need to start saving up for college. And where did you see our ad? Well, I walk past here pretty much every day on the way to school. Oh, school, where do you go to school? Mountain High. Oh yeah? There's a song called Rocky Mountain High. You ever hear it? Yeah, my mom likes that song. Well, you tell your mom she's got good taste. Can you work nights and weekends? This interview was in Major Tom's office, which is what he calls it, even though it's a closet next to the employee bathroom that he shoved a desk and roller chair into. There's a big corkboard on the wall that he puts motivational quotes on. If you can dream it, you can do it. With the new day comes new strength and new thoughts. A life lived without purpose is no life at all. If at first you don't succeed, try again. It's like he intentionally searched for the lamest quotes in the history of the world, you know? Walk one day out and another day in, home, school, work. At first I used to call Major Tom by his name, Mr. Montalvo, but he doesn't want me to. Call me Tom, Will. Which at first I interpreted as him wanting to be called Tom Will, which is weird. But no, Will's my name and Tom's his name, the name he wanted to call him. I'd been there a week at this point, and already I knew that Dollar Only is pretty much his life. Some people, they're like that. They smile in a kind of helpless way. Joke. So I did what I do with people like Major Tom, jump in, start giving them shit. Then they feel included, like they're part of the world, like they have actual friends, like someone sees them. Why I started calling him Major Tom? Because he likes music. He's about my mom's age. So I figure he must know that Bowie song, Space Oddity, the one that she loves, about Major Tom. Bowie was old, but cool. So a nickname like Major Tom would make Mr. Montalvo feel cool, which it does. I mean, how could it not? I mean, Bowie. Sure. Music is the refuge of the lonely, my dad used to say. That and carry on, my wayward son, and don't let the bastards get you down, and a bunch of other things. But those are the ones I think about the most. Music isn't only the refuge of the lonely, but still, I know what he meant, like with Major Tom. Ground control to Major Tom, I say over the loudspeaker when I need Mr. Montalvo at the register. Commencing countdown, engines on, is what he usually says, right back over the loudspeaker, and he's right over. Sure. Sometimes he sings part of the song, the one about the spaceship knowing which way to go, and another one about how much he loves his wife. Mr. Montalvo doesn't have a spaceship and he doesn't have a wife, but he loves it when I call him Major Tom. Things aren't easy for Major Tom. Social skills kind of things, you know. Some things aren't easy for me either, but that's not one of them. I know how to give people shit, when to step forward, when to pull back. It's like a dance where you're born knowing the steps. Sure are. Not Major Tom, though. Sometimes when I'm closing, I'm sitting there in his closet/office, going over the schedule, writing emails, and every time he thinks he hears someone coming around, he swivels with that awkward person smile. Once, it's really late because some kid spilled an entire bottle of detergent in aisle 9. I see him close his eyes, jab his finger on one of his lame motivational quotes, then open his eyes and read it loud and nod, like his socially awkward life is going to change now. And honestly, I can hardly stand it. That little nod, you know? All right. So that was the first 12 chapters of What I Leave Behind. It is 12% book that I just read. When I began this book, just to give you a little background about it, I wanted to write a novel that felt like a poem. And that meant that all the words had to be filtered through a fine mesh filter so that only the absolutely necessary ones were left. And at the time I was thinking of this book, I thought, if you make the chapters really, really short, you can create that kind of effect. And I was at the time standing in a dollar store, and I thought it was a brilliant idea to take 100 photos then and there and have there be an image to go with each chapter. And so I got home and I spent hours organizing my Word document into, landscape instead of portrait, and then carefully placing in each of these images. But I'm such a terrible photographer, and the photos were so awful and ugly that I abandoned ship with that, but I still stuck with the 100-word chapter thing. And I decided that my teenager, the only thing I knew about the book was that it was going to be about a teenager helping out a friend who was in trouble. I decided that my teenager would work at a dollar store. And then I thought, you know what, just push this thing all the way, use multiples of 100 throughout. And so I created the 100 chapters. There was a Chinese blessing store in LA, which is where the book is set. And so each chapter ended up not with a dollar store photo, but with a beautiful hand calligraphied Chinese number. And at some point in the writing of this book, which I loved writing more than any book I can remember writing, I decided to push it all the way and make each of the 100 chapters exactly 100 words each. So it was an exercise in reduction and pairing. And just in case you ever need to know, every dot in an ellipse counts as a word in Word, if you're using word count. So at the very last minute, I had to make a whole bunch of changes to the book, add 3 words here, take 3 words out there. But I ended up with a book that is exactly 10,000 words, and that felt to me in my heart like the poem about loss and kindness and love that I wanted it to be. So there you go.
I'm just gonna sit here and drink my tea and think about that. That's an incredible thing to set out to do, and to decide what stays, what really is contained in those 100 words. I love it. Thank you so much. Our second guest this evening is Mike Wanitka, and Mike has always been an artist, says his bio, and he has illustrated over 30 books for children, several of which he has written as well, and he has recently won, I'm going to mess this up, it's the Geisel Award. I'm looking over my shoulder at another screen, and with fellow Minnesotan David LaRochelle, and I am told by people who know that this is a big deal. So welcome, Mike.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Allison. That was wonderful. It was what a great parameters you put on yourself. That's really impressive. So I'm going to actually share my screen, and I am going to talk about a book that came out a few years ago. Can everyone see that okay? I'm going to share the process of writing and illustrating that book, but it's a picture book, so it's a little shorter. So I thought I would also share a little bit about how I became an illustrator, very briefly. So I'm going to start way back in Head Start. My mom a while back, gave me this box, and it had all these Head Start drawings in the box. And I was one of those kids that loved to draw ever since I can remember. And there was one drawing in there that really stood out. It was a family portrait. And I grew up in a big family. I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. And when I saw this drawing of my family that I did when I was 4, I thought, wow, that's exactly what it was like growing up in our house. And here is that drawing. And that's my dad in the middle. My dad yelled a lot. He was always yelling. And I'm over in the lower left, and I'm drawn in the brown crayon as well. And my brother Dave was also drawn in the brown crayon. And he was just a year older than me. Everyone thought we were twins. And we both have these kind of fish heads. I'm not sure why. But I think a psychologist would have a field day with this drawing. There's a lot going on here. But this was what I really looked like when I was in Head Start. And these are the books I loved as a kid. But I had no idea that P.D. Eastman, Sid Hoff, and Richard Scarry were the illustrators of these books. I had no idea they were real people. I had no idea you could do this for a living when I was a kid. And then when I got into high school, I did this painting. Just kidding. I had a wonderful high school art teacher. I grew up, actually, this is coming out, this is hosted by the Willmar Public Library, and I grew up in Spicer, which is very close to Willmar. And I had a wonderful high school art teacher, Mr. Chase, and he really encouraged me. Well, he told me 2 things. I remember my senior year to start thinking about maybe having, going into art as a career possibility, and also to try to start expressing myself through my art. And a couple painters really resonated with me at the time. One was this artist. This is Starry Night by Vincent van Gogh. And this one, this is Pablo Picasso, and especially his blue period. So I started looking at my life, what was going on, and how could I express what was going on in my life. And again, I looked at my dad. And at this time, when I was in high school, my dad really didn't yell anymore, but he just became pretty quiet. He would come home from work every day, and he would sit in his chair, read the paper or watch TV, and really didn't have a lot to do with us kids. So I did a drawing of him, and this is that drawing. And we entered this into the Scholastic Art Show, and it ended up earning me a 4-year scholarship to the Savannah College of Art and Design. It wasn't a full ride, but it was a really good scholarship, which helped, our family. We would have been able to afford me going to art school. So it was an incredible thing that happened. So I grew up in Spicer. I went to college in Savannah, Georgia. And when I got to art school, I thought I just loved to draw. I didn't know what kind of artist I wanted to be. But fortunately, one of the first weeks of art school was Illustration Week. And they brought in all these professional illustrators to talk about their work. And one of the presentations I went to was by this guy. And he is David Shannon, the author and illustrator of the No David books. And he gave a presentation about how he illustrated his first book, How Many Spots Does a Leopard Have? And after seeing his presentation, I thought, wow, you can do that for a living? I had no idea. And ever since that moment, I knew I wanted to illustrate children's books. So I went to college with SCAD, it's affectionately known as, for 4 years, studied illustration, moved back to Minneapolis or Minnesota, moved to Minneapolis to start my career as an illustrator. And this was not easy. It took 6 years of sending samples of my work to publishers until finally Random House called me with an early reader book called Counting Sheep. And this was the first book that I illustrated. And once I got into one publishing house, I started getting lots of work and started illustrating a lot of books. And then about 10 years ago, I joined a writers group and I started writing my own stories. And the first story that I wrote and illustrated was Little Puppy and the Big Green Monster. So my writing process, whenever I write, I think about two things. These things are posted very large on my writing wall, and they are who. Who is the story going to be about? I always have to come up with that character, and then what is that struggle? I'm always thinking about a struggle. And writing for me is really hard. And I feel fortunate that I have this drawing skill that I can just draw characters, and I have pages and pages of characters, and then I try to find problems for those characters. But one particular morning, I was sitting in my studio and I just couldn't think of anything to write or to draw even. So I decided I'm just going to draw a picture of myself sitting there trying to come up with something to write about. So this is what I look like when I'm writing. And I really liked this drawing. And I thought, well, maybe I could write a story about this guy. You know, you're supposed to write about what you know. So I had the who, I had a character, and now I needed a problem. And what was I struggling with at this time in my life? Well, I was struggling with these two. And these are my kids, Olivia and Franklin. They were starting school for the first time. Olivia was starting preschool, Franklin was starting kindergarten. And this was really hard for me to let them go off to school for the first time. So I thought maybe I could write a story about me struggling to let them go off to school. So I started writing. And when I write, I always draw at the same time. I'm always writing the words and drawing pictures just simultaneously. So I started writing. This is Franklin, and this is Franklin's dad. All summer, Franklin and his dad played together, laughed together. When summer was over, it was time for Oliver to start preschool. And I changed his name pretty quickly because it wasn't just about Franklin, it was about Olivia too. So I thought a compromise would be to name the little boy Oliver. Yay, school. On the first day of school, Oliver was ready. But Oliver's dad wasn't ready. My tummy hurts. So I left a few pages out. Oliver's dad drives Oliver to school, and then it's time to say goodbye. Don't worry, Daddy, I'll be okay. And they wave goodbye. And Oliver's dad goes to the parking lot and cries. But Oliver's teacher comes out to console him and says, it's going to get easier. I promise. The first day is always the hardest for daddies. Okay. But Oliver's dad still worried. And these are all the things I worried about and my wife worried about for Franklin and Olivia. What if I didn't pack enough in his lunch? What if the big kids pick on him? What if he gets lost? What if he gets sick? What if he has an accident? What if he doesn't zip his zipper? What if? He ran back to the classroom. And then the end is pretty much what ended up in the final book. So I'm going to leave that up. So I came up with a title and a cover. And I sent this little book dummy off to my editor at Bloomsbury. And she said she loved it. They always say that. And then she said, but she loved the concept, but she wanted some revisions. And this is one of, I think actually the hardest part of my job is when they have these revisions, because whenever I write something, I work really hard on it. And I think it's perfect just the way it is. But she had two specific ideas. One, she wanted me to up the humor. And I thought it was already pretty funny. But she also wanted to really have the dad play the role of a 5-year-old. And I wasn't sure about this, but I went back to the drawing board and I played with both of these ideas. And it's hard for me to admit, but every time I work with my editor, it always ends up being a stronger book. And there's no better example in my career than this one. So what if, after making those revisions, making it funnier and hopefully making it funnier and making the dad seem more like a 5-year-old, it became Dad's first day. And now I'll read the story. This is Oliver, and this is Oliver's dad. All summer they played together, laughed together, sang together, and read together. When summer was over, it was time for Oliver to start school. Are you ready for school? Yes. The night before school started, Oliver and his dad got ready. They're making Oliver's lunch. Yum, yum. Packing the backpack. Arg, matey, on guard. New backpack, new shoes. Perfect, perfect. On the first day of school, Oliver was ready. Something's blocking that. But Oliver's dad wasn't ready. My tummy hurts. It's okay, Daddy. You're just a little nervous. Come on, let's go. We don't want to be late for the first day of school. But Oliver's dad had a few things he needed to do before they left, like this very important puzzle. Daddy, what are you doing? We need to go now. So Oliver's dad hid behind the couch. Oliver found him. He hid inside the closet. Oliver found him. He hid outside. Daddy! Oliver found him and dragged him to the car. Oliver's dad drove very slowly. You're probably going to really miss me when you're at school, Oliver. Sure, Daddy. When they got to school, Oliver ran to his classroom and met his teacher. So nice to meet you, Oliver. My tummy really hurts. Then it was time to say goodbye. Bye, Daddy. Daddy? Daddy? Daddy! The teacher walked Oliver's dad outside. Bye, Daddy. Oliver's dad drove home. He couldn't stop thinking about Oliver. There's the baseball bat they played with and the baseball. He worried about Oliver. He missed Oliver, and his tummy really, really hurt. And then he realized, I'm not ready for school. Oliver's dad drove back to the school. He ran to the classroom. And just before he opened the door, he stopped. He couldn't believe what he saw. Oliver was playing. He was laughing. He was singing and reading. All the things that Oliver and his dad did together all summer. Oliver's dad smiled. Oliver and his dad were ready for school. After the first day of school, they celebrated until their tummies hurt. Good job, Daddy. And that's Dad's first day.
Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing the whole story. I love it. I love having children's book authors in these programs because you do get the whole thing usually. And it's just, I mean, I'm glad I have nieces and nephews because I love kids' books so much, but this gives me another excuse. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy.
Our third friend this evening is poet Sanyang Shin. And she co-directs the Poetry Asylum with fellow Minnesota poet Sue Wong. and she was born in Seoul, South Korea, and was raised in Chicago. Now she is here in Minnesota, which is delightful. So thank you, and welcome, Sanyang.
Thank you, Wendy. And thank you, Allison and Mike. That was so great. I am just feeling so many feelings. And Mike, my daughter just started at SCAD. So I just was down there helping her. She's actually in at the Atlanta campus, and I was helping her get settled in. And yeah, it's very expensive. I had to co-sign for the loan. I will be faking my own death to escape that. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing your journey. And that picture, illustration of your dad definitely could have been my dad as well. Very Chicago guy. He grew up in a big family. Yeah, so yes, and children's books we love. Preview, I don't have any pictures yet, but I've been co-writing a children's book with John Coy, and I noticed your cow in the cow in the puzzle as well. And Shannon Gibney and Diane Wilson, and it's my second children's book, but the first co-written one has just been really fascinating. I think there's actually nothing more important than literature for children, and for all, because it's for all of us. So anyway, thank you so much. I wish I want to just actually listen to you too. But here I will read some poems and talk a little bit about this. I don't know. I was like, I'm gonna just feel the vibe and decide, but then I'm really preoccupied with your projects. So I will read the poem, the last poem in this book, Unbearable Splendor, which was my last book of poems, but I have another one coming out next June. So this book, this poem has a picture. It's from Dante's comedy trilogy. It's not really a comedy. And this is the map of paradise and the map of hell at the bottom. And I'm really fascinated with maps and with kind of spiritual cartographies. And I grew up Roman Catholic, and so Dante's world, which is, the meeting of the pagan world and the Catholic world, with Virgil, the guide, and with Dante, the tourist of hell, purgatory, and heaven, has always really fascinated me and was a big part of my second book, Rough and Savage. So this poem has just the 10 levels of paradise, and it's definitely also inspired by my childhood. So the first one is called Paradise, the First Sphere, the Moon, the Inconstant. When I was a child, I had a rocking horse, a horse on thick springs, its mane ever tousled in the exact same way, day after year. I would ride it into a hole in the ground that opened just for me, just for my horse and me. The passage of time below was inconstant, while time above rocked back and forth on its unseen springs. Second sphere, Mercury, the ambitious. My dream was to reach paradise wherever it was, through the tunnel, along the swinging bridge, down the shaft, through cave after cave. What came through? Trains and babies with their nurses and businessmen dressed all alike. Each time I was tempted to plant mines behind me that would flower into fire, preventing me from being followed. Third sphere, Venus, the lovers. In my saddlebag, I carried hearts that I had found among the crowds above ground. I carved my name on their surprisingly tough surfaces as though they were picnic tables, a pastoral banquet waiting for me. Fourth sphere, the sun, the wise. It is dangerous to be wise. You might be called upon to separate mating snakes, eat their skin, be cursed to live as a woman for 7 years, to marry and bear children and turn back again, burdened by knowledge, by this metamorphosis. Fifth sphere, Mars, the warriors of the faith. So many ways to kill the faithless. Every body can be broken, burned, a bane, a bond. To destroy my enemies, I need only join them, transforming them into my brothers, my family, my people. Sixth sphere, Jupiter, the just rulers. We are guests above the ground. While alive, we are uncanny, always falling back into wilderness. Our vegetable love outlasts the centuries, outlasts the protean nature of the justice of the day. Addicted to authority, the ground littered with needles, our blood mingled and tainted, impure. You cannot escape me now because I am inside you. Seventh sphere, Saturn, the contemplatives. No more hangings, no more gas chambers, no one allowed to remain in the center of the labyrinth, guarding their DNA from the world, from the future. No more contemplation, no more waste. Everyone leaning toward paradise. Shields down, and the word enemy will pass from memory. You are my kind. Eighth sphere, the fixed stars, faith, hope, and love. At the end of the world, we will move through this wild, infinite palace, gardens with the softest of flowers, folded, mellow light, all unruly, every room filled with animals risen from extinction, the taste of sacrifice still on our lips, all atoms equal, every snake biting its own tail, and every child tearing down the tent. Ninth sphere, the primum mobile, the angels. At the end of the world, everything will be winged. My neck is a door, walk through it to the rough and savage woods inside me. Take your torch and burn any monsters to hot ash and dust. I can cough everything out and back into this blazing world. Axe to the frozen sea, hexes and incantations, yesterday's reverie, usher in every little last thing you have. And this is the last section, the Empyrean. At last, light all around us, your body a room of lamps, every wick lit as though it were the world's last birthday. Time is now inside you, transfer and possession, holding nothing back, indifferent to your illegitimacy, disinterested in my grief, pierced with all of my joy. Inside me, a second, better person, furnished with perfect recall, my convict, my warden, my guest, my host. Thank you. I'll read one more piece. And it's from a project I did last year with ArtSpeak, a gallery in Canada, in Vancouver. And it's called Granted to a Foreign Citizen. It's a limited edition chapbook you can get from ArtSpeak. And it's part of an exhibit called Unstately that was examining sort of the politics of citizenship and migration. And so I use a lot of book documents from my citizenship process and my naturalization process. And this is a reproduction of the original booklet that I got, a welcome to USA citizenship. And then the first page on the inside is duties of a citizen. And then it goes on from there, but I only reproduced that one page. So the booklet itself is the same I was working with visual artists, which I love to do, but also everything has to be perfect. And I'm just really lazy and messy about, I mean, I like, you know, because with the poetry, for the most part, it's like, it is just weird, and there's not like a perfect, but with the visual art and the artists, like, I don't know if they would say there's a perfect, but it was very exacting and precise. So like the color numbers and, you know, everything was a lot of processing, and the fonts, and this is an old-fashioned Korean flag with the I Ching trigrams and everything. And so, you know, this color is the same color and it's the same red as the American booklet. And I was naturalized in 1979, I think. So I'm going to read this one poem, and I taught high school English for 13 years and have taught, just a lot of different kinds of classrooms and spaces. And I used to do this like with vocabulary with my students to help them learn things, and would be to make word finds out of vocabulary words. So this is the poem, and I've done several word finds as poems before, and I really like the form for a lot of different reasons. And the words in the poem, the words that are in the word bank that you can find in here are from it's actually revised in 2008, but they're still online when I found them last year. This is what you get when you go to the US Citizenship and Immigration Services website of the US government. It's the reading vocabulary suggestion list, like to study if you're studying for the citizenship test. This is the chart that you'll find on the internet that's current. You can't read it, but it looks like this. So it's just copied. It's just copied and pasted into here. And there's these columns. The columns across read people, civics, places, holidays, question words, verbs, other, function, and other content. And so, you know, the two people you need to know are Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. And then things like, you know, civics is, you need to know father of our country, and that's all capitalized. And other content, colors, dollar bill, first, largest, many, most, north, one people, second, south. Anyway, so this is the poem. I'll read that and then I'm going to stop talking. And they're just alphabetized. And so the purpose of that is to just disorient, you know, I'm always playing with language to try to sort of disorient our relationship to, especially language, the language of authority, really, the language of stateism. Abraham, America, bill, capital, citizen, city, colors, Columbus, Congress, country, dollar, father, first, flag, George. Government, house, independence, labor, largest, Lincoln. Many, meet, memorial, name, north, one, people, presidents, right. Rights, second, senator, south, state, states, Thanksgiving, united, vote, Washington, what, when, where, white, why. Thank you so much. Look forward to our chat. I hope you all have things to chat about too. Love to hear from you.
Amazing, thank you. It's fascinating to me that those are the words that are there on the citizenship test. I guess it's fascinating. So thank you for disorienting our relationship to the language of authority, because it's a good project. So before we get rolling on questions from the audience, please do throw those into the chat as you have them. But I saw this has already come up as you're talking, but I have one to sort of get us started, and that is, what questions do you find yourself sort of returning to again and again and again you know, as you work on new projects, or even after you finished something and you're just like, oh, there's that thing again, because I can't apparently write or draw or anything without coming up with this, you know, this particular thematic element, or apparently I haven't answered that one yet. So that's where I would like us to begin.
Well, I just write the same book over and over. It takes many different forms and for many different ages, but honestly, the same themes, they've never changed. They've never changed since I was a baby. And they are, the theme for me is how do you keep going and live a life of meaning and stake your claim on your identity and a place in the world in the face of everything that life just dumps on you. And I thought of this with both of this. This is a theme that I relate to in both the works that you presented, Mike, that inversion of the dad not being able to let his little child go. It's as if we're always still that small child. And that book could have been written about me with any of my children on the first day of kindergarten. And then, so I think no matter what we look like on the outside, we still are these just tender, small things inside in our deepest core. And how do you, in a world where it can just seem so filled with hardship and cruelty, you know, how do you make it better? How do you help yourself get through? How do you help the world get better? And Sun Young, your first poem, I kept hearing these references to enemies and how to transform your enemy. So something like, to defeat my enemies, I need only transform them into family, and then shields down, and the word enemy will disappear from memory. And that feels like something I'm constantly working with in my own books. You know, how do you connect with people who on the outside may look so different, and yet there is a language that you can both speak, and it always requires me to put down my shield and my righteous anger and just connect on that deep baby born into the world way, I guess. And so I'm always doing that. I do this and this. How is this 16-year-old tender-hearted boy going to make it through these awful things that have happened to him and to his dear childhood friend Playa? And his solution is, all he can come up with is just tiny little random acts of kindness that help the unseen. So that's a theme. I just keep chewing it over, book to book to book.
Yeah, beautiful. Mike, you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I guess there are, well, I kind of feel the same way, Allison. I do feel like I write the same story over and over. But I'm thinking about this a little differently in the sense that there are often drawings that I have that will just resonate with me, and they will sit for, that I love. And I'm trying to write a story for that particular drawing. For example, there's this drawing I did of this bear looking up at this school bus. And I loved this drawing so much. I still love it. And I worked on a story about this little bear starting school for 6 years, just going back and forth, and I could not find a story for it. And then finally something clicked, and it actually ended up becoming this book so big. So that's the thing for me as an illustrator. I definitely think of myself as an illustrator more than an author. And I have these stories that are drawings that just sit there. And I have this one I found that it's this tree and this bear. And this is one that I probably did 10 years ago. And I am just, the question that keeps coming up is, what story do I want to tell about this bear? And I know someday it's going to happen, but I just have to be patient with it. So that's kind of I go back, every time I sit down to write, it seems like that bear comes up, but then I just can't find the story for, it's just something that I get a little frustrated with, because I have thousands of drawings of this, or hundreds of the drawings of this bear and this tree, and I don't know, I can't find the story. So, but the nice thing about it is oftentimes something else happens, even though I intend to write about this bear and this tree, and then and I just drift off to something else, and something else clicks. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It gets me to the table, I guess, sometimes.
They're like your concierge icons or something.
Yeah.
Something also, there's just something, it's very archetypal. Yeah, the bear is such a great animal. Figures in the Korean origin story. The bear has the patience to stay in the cave for 100 days and then gets rewarded by being turned into a human. Whereas the tiger did not have the patience to stay in the cave and eat mugwort and garlic for 100 days. So tiger left and partied on as a tiger. But yeah, I mean, the bear as a creature of patience, and yeah, that we have a lot in common with in other ways, I think. So that's sweet. Thank you for sharing that. And Allison, when I was listening to your novel, I love verse novels. I love that there's more and more verse novels for young readers, or all readers of all ages, including young readers. And it was reminding me a little bit, and I hope you take this as a compliment because I mean it that way, a little bit of Member of the Wedding.
Oh, that's one of my favorite books.
I was like, I bet she really likes Carson McCullers, but if she doesn't, I'm going to feel bad. But I mean,
huge compliment. Thank you.
Good. I mean, that book is haunting, right? Haunting. That character haunts me. I mean, her longing, Oh, yeah. So thank you for this beautiful work. And that, like, yeah, just that, where that kind of innocence is meeting the world. And yeah. So anyway, Wendy, to your question, I mean, I one of my questions, and that I really foregrounded in the Granted to a Foreign Citizen, is, what does, and that I'm always asking in different ways, what does it mean to be an American right now, whenever the right now is, because of America's footprint, imperial footprint on the rest of the planet for all life forms, not just other humans. It's really a very strange, heightened way to be a human in the history of humans. The Roman Empire didn't have this kind of impact on species, didn't cause mass extinctions. And so for me, as an immigrant, as a relocated, adopted person, since so much of my identity as a US person is constructed or like replaced, I'm always kind of trying to figure out, like, what are we all occupied by? Like, what's occupying us? Since my kids are like kind of grown up now, I'm entering like a new childhood or something. The other thing about parenting that people don't tell you, or no one told me, like, you will relive your own childhood. And and that is going to be an uncanny experience, potentially healing, but really strange. So that, Mike, that was just bringing me back to when my kids were little. They're 21 and 24 now. And that sweetness of just how sweet they are at that age, and loving. And So yeah, this, what does it mean to be a US citizen? What are the sort of rights and obligations that aren't articulated by the state? On a spiritual level, I've been asking, how do I create less suffering? Including, how do I create less of my own suffering? So I can, can I get liberated in this lifetime, in this body? And how can I be of service? What do I need to do so that I can be of service to, those that I encounter, the world, whatever. The world that sounds really grandiose. I don't mean it that way, but like, how can I be of service? But not in that kind of Western, like weird martyr, like weird, way. And create less suffering is something that I'm focusing on now. And how, I don't know how it's going to manifest in the work, thinking a lot about climate or just life and land and relationships. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I feel, I'm like, I think am I tearing up? I feel like I'm like, all of you are just, all of you are just saying very things that matter a whole lot to me right now as a human being and as an artistically inclined human being. And I just, that sense of service in a way that doesn't foreground my own experience, or doesn't, in this weird shifting American identity, and this idea of, where your identity is and why the things keep coming up the way they do. You're a little bear. There's a beautiful metaphor in there somewhere, but I don't know. I tie it into that patience then, because because it is there. I'm just doing a lot of thinking out loud myself, but thank you all very much for. I love finding these. I never know what the surprising commonality is going to be when I put these panels together, and it's my favorite thing to experience when that happens. Audience, if you have questions, I would love to see them. I have kind of a lighter one, which I enjoy doing sometimes, but what was your most memorable inciting event for a piece of work? Is something that just sort of there it was, or something that was particularly funny or weird, or that then became something. Yes.
I can tell you one book. I'll just grab it here. This book, Dear Sister, it kind of feeds into what Mike and Sun Young were also talking about.
My copy right here, Allison.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's great. Well, when my youngest child went to college, I just thought I would die of heartbreak. I just felt like my heart was broken, and all I could do was think back to their childhoods and how I'd messed up and why had I done that and why hadn't I done this, because I knew at the time it was going to go by so fast, and here you are, Allison, and it did go by so fast, and now she's gone and they're all gone and your life is empty and broken. That's how it felt. I'm not kidding. That's how it felt. And so I decided, as long as I was just in absolute misery, I might as well just get out all their boxes of childhood memorabilia and go through it all and just pare down and organize so they each had one big box. And so I dumped them all out on the living room floor, and my dog and I just sort of, and Kat and I just sort of went through everything, and I was just mourning. My heart was broken. And then I kept, surprisingly, I kept finding little notes that I'd saved that they had written to each other. I actually think I have them here, but one was written by my youngest to her older sister and her older sister's best friend. And in order to protect the guilty, I will not use names, but it was, "Dear sister, I am happy to be your servant all day until bedtime." And I remembered a day when we had all been home and my poor youngest, she just kept running up and down the stairs carrying plates of cheese and crackers and, you know, glasses of water. And at one point I marched upstairs and said to her sister, "What is going on here?" And her sister looked at me and said, "Mom, you're always telling us you want us to play with her. We're playing with her." So I connected the dots and I kept finding other notes, you know, sister from my oldest. He was supposed to be babysitting her. And I came home, she's ensconced on the couch, the door's unlocked, she's watching TV, she's surrounded by dry, salty, crunchy carbohydrates. And there's a note on the fridge: "Sister, watch TV. I'll be in Uptown, brother." And so suddenly in the middle of all this, I remembered, oh, I guess they weren't perfect. I guess nothing was perfect. And right then and there, I decided to write a book that was just notes and drawings from a brother to his sister who was born 8 years after he was. And so from heartbreak came, it's a really funny book. But yeah, that's an inciting incident. Finding out realizing my children were not, you know, quite as perfect as in my heartbreak I thought of them as.
Really delightful.
That's a great book, Allison.
Thank you. I'm so glad, Mike. Thanks.
Well, I'll go ahead. And my insight was actually back to this. This is a different bear. That other story is the tree and the bear is a different, but this little bear in this big school bus, like I said, it sat in my studio for 6 years and I would go back to it. And I just kept going back to it and writing about this bear starting school. And it was getting to be kind of a longer picture book with lots of words. And then there was one day I had this sketch. I don't think I have it. Well, actually, I've got the book here. Of the little bear walking to school. And right here, this bear, and I wrote so big under that sketch of this bear. And it dawned on me that those were the only words I needed for this whole book. And I took all these other sketches from the book. This is obviously the final book, but they were just sketches like him in his bed. And I had this whole like bear gets up and he, sees the sunshine or whatever I had. And then I realized all I needed was so big, just those two words. And then this page is so big. So the whole book, I mean, there are 6 total words in it, but majority are just so big. And that insight was just like, it was like that last piece of a puzzle and it just fell into place. And 6 years of just going back to that story, playing with it. And then once I realized that, like I said, it just all fell into place. And I wrote it, I mean, very quickly because I had all these sketches and I just had to put so big under all the sketches and kind of rearrange everything and make it into a story. And it was just that lightning bolt of inspiration.
I so love that kind of magic when it's so rare. It's just so rare, at least for me. And when it comes, it's like, oh, I've never done heroin or anything, but I imagine like this is what you crave. You just crave that kind of fix, that joyous ride. Yeah. Do you know the book Yo Yes by Chris Roshka, Mike?
I do. Yep.
Oh, I love that book. And just, it's 34 words total. I typed them out, but I think there's maybe 6 or 7 words, different words in it. And you just reminded me of that.
Yeah. So, yeah, and you think it's going to happen every time you go to the table, that it's going to spark, but it happens about every 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. All I have are sad stories, except it's not, yeah. So with this is my first poetry book, Skirt Full of Black. And I don't tell this very often because it's really random, and I think, but you asked, so it's your fault. If no one likes it, that's Wendy's fault. But
I'll take this one on. It's fine. I shall accept.
It is inspired by an old Scooby-Doo episode where the team, the crew, how they catch the villain, who is of course a man dressed like a woman. It seemed like there were a lot of villains. A lot of the villains would dress up like women to disguise themselves. And so he was dressed up like a woman, and it was like either like a reproduced saloon town, like Western town, or maybe it was actually in the Western town. And I think maybe someone, Fred, or maybe someone threw something at his lap, and he closed his legs to catch it. And they realized, whoever threw it realized he was a man, because a woman at the time or in that place who was wearing a skirt would have spread her legs to catch the thing in her skirt. And that is the kind of thing that I get obsessed with. And so that's where Skirt Full of Black came from. But then it was also like letters and, gender oblivion and, all kinds of things. So yeah, the Scooby-Doo story is very lowbrow, which I love. I'm very lowbrow, so but
it raises a really fascinating bunch of questions, I guess. There's a lot of directions you can go with that.
I mean, that's something I thought as a kid, and it stuck with me for 30 years or whatever, because and as a girl, you in America at the time, and in many places still, like, it's just very, very, everything was very gendered, and the clothes dictate so much of the manners and posture, mannerisms and actions, and how you can move and how you can't move and all of that. So that inspired a lot of the kind of different sort of gender explorations of gender in language for that book. So thank you, Scooby-Doo creators. It's kind of a brilliant episode. I recommend it to everyone. I've never seen it since, so I don't know, but.
Right.
I have always loved that title, Sun Young. Like I have it written down when your book first came out. I love the book, but the title, holy crud, it's just, when I think of great titles, I think of that title.
Oh, thanks.
Right up there. Yeah, wow. So that's the backstory. I'm so happy to know this.
Mm-hmm.
I am in awe of good titles.
For bringing some lowbrow. I thought I'd be the only one bringing lowbrow to the.
Nope. I will always go lower. Whatever it is, go lower. Yeah.
I thought it was me. Like maybe I'm the one bringing the low. Everything I do is pop culturally driven somehow, I swear. But anyway, I have, if there are not, dear audience, questions from you, and if any of the three of you want to throw anything out there, it's been wonderful, but I know there's a dog sitting under someone who has a limit, and perhaps one in Allison's house tearing things up as we speak. So
rip those doors away. He is and I don't know what it is.
But it really has been incredibly delightful to spend this just over an hour with the three of you, and I have so much to think about as usual, and really wonderful insights about process and patience, and how to wait for the bear to tell the story the bear wants to tell. will,
Put it.
Yeah,
Thank
I will
you.
leave
I
it.
loved listening. I loved listening to you. So thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you all. It
Yes,
was,
thank you all, and thank
So
you
good
to,
to be together. Yeah.
yeah, thank you to the Willmar Public Library for their partnership in this event this evening. I'm so glad to have put it on for all of you and to have such wonderful human beings to share the Zoom world with. So on that note, good night, all of you.
Night.
Bye,
thank you.
everyone.
Bye. Thanks for coming.